There once was a bat named Flappy, and his only thought both day and night was simply to hang upside down in a giant old oak tree in a place called Grosvenor's Court. He liked looking at the world this way because he thought it gave him a different perspective. But hanging upside down also gave him acid reflux, and since he didn't have any type of medical insurance, mainly because he was a bat and he was ineligible for any of the many prescription remedies that were out there on the market, all he could do was suffer with his condition. He would hear all the stories told by nearby picnicking hypochondriacs about all the miracle drugs they would take to alleviate their illnesses, and he dreamed of someday also being able to visit a pharmacy and perhaps shoplift some of these wonder medicines for his own use. Flappy knew that getting his hands on any sort of medicines would be a long shot, but he kept his options open. Flappy also longed for the day when he might be able to give his esophagus a break from all the caustic digestive fluids, even if just for a little while by perhaps flying around somewhere in a more upright position. But he had never flown before, and thus flying would be a totally frightening and unknown experience for him as well. He would watch other bats, birds, bees, dragonflies, butterflies doing just this, flying, but he could never personally bring himself to try it out for himself. In the meantime, Flappy continued to hang upside down in the giant oak tree in Grosvenor's Court as the harsh stomach acids ate away at his tender throat lining. One day, however, Flappy decided that he couldn't live the rest of his life clinging to the side of a tree with acid and saliva backing up into his throat, sometimes dribbling down and staining the ancient bark of the giant old oak tree that was his home. He wanted to do something for his confidence and his acid reflux. There was a great big old acid reflux-free world out there, and he was determined to see it for himself. Finally, after much thought, Flappy gathered up all his courage and decided to take a chance. He let go of the giant old oak tree that had been his home and his safety blanket for the better part of his young life, and he began to free fall. Countless tree limbs, branches, leaves, and twigs began to pass him by at an alarming speed. Flappy knew that he would have to do something soon if he didn't want to end up splattered like a water balloon at the base of a giant old oak tree, and so he began to flap his wings. At first, these attempts seemed feeble, and Flappy continued to free fall, but he kept at it, and before he knew it, Flappy was indeed flying. He flew up and down and this way and that, and he began to see things he never imagined he would ever have seen in his life. He saw clouds up close, he saw the tops of trees, and for the first time in his life, he saw the horizon. He also felt relief for the first time in his life from his acid reflux condition. Flappy was speechless. Bats can't normally talk, but sometimes in stories they can. But this isn't that kind of story, but if they could speak, he still would have been speechless. That's just how amazed he was. Anyway, since this was the extent of his experience with flying, he didn't know how to pace himself, and Flappy began to grow tired. He had never flown at all before, and exerting himself in this way made him extremely exhausted, and before he could fly back again to the safety of his giant old oak tree that stood in the middle of Grosvenor's Court, Flappy began to once more free fall. He could see the world passing him by again at an alarming speed, and his only thought now was to wait till he was close enough to a tree branch so that he could latch onto it, thereby saving himself from splattering like a water balloon in the middle of a rapidly approaching meadow that stood between him and the safety of Grosvenor's Court. It sounded like a fantastic idea to him, but he soon found that there were no trees or branches for him to latch onto this time. He had traveled too far from his home, and down he continued to plummet until suddenly, from out of nowhere, Flappy saw himself headed straight for the open mouth of a hungry cat. And then, with a deafening gulp, Flappy was no more. He had become a meal for Fluffy the feral cat that stalked the outskirts of Grosvenor's Court, looking for opportunities just like this one. Fluffy slept soundly that afternoon, sparrows and starlings safe just a few feet away. They pecked and scratched at the ground and sang happy tunes, knowing that Fluffy wouldn't be chasing after them, especially now that she had a nice meal in her belly. They could give a bat's ass about what happened to poor old Flappy. As long as they lived to sing another day, that's all they cared about. And the moral of this story, if there even is a moral to this story, is, if you've seen one cloud, you've seen them all. And sometimes it's better to live with a little acid reflux than to end up getting eaten by a cat.